It's my great pleasure to introduce the first speaker of our final session, and she happens to be a fellow New Yorker and also a dear friend who I think has probably known me since I was in high school. Full disclosure, Alisa was colleagues with my mother, who's by far the most talented member of the Geronimus family. Hopefully she's not listening. Although at least time-wise, this is much better than I think 4 in the morning when she was listening to the early morning sessions back in New York. But Alisa LaGamma is the Seal and Michael E. Pulitzer Curator in charge of the Michael C. Rockefeller Wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Her work there over the last 25 years has expanded the collection and developed over a dozen influential exhibitions instrumental to the appreciation of sub-Saharan African art and culture. She is currently, as you've heard, overseeing the Met Museum's capital project to re-envision the wing's permanent galleries devoted to the Michael C. Rockefeller Wing that are scheduled to open in May, which makes it all the more miraculous that Alisa took the time to not just contribute, but in fact make the transatlantic flight to be with us. Among Alisa's most recent projects, as I'm sure many of you have either known or seen, is Sahel, Art and Empires on the Shores of the Sahara. And her exhibition Congo, Majesty and Power, which received much critical acclaim, and its accompanying publication was in fact reflecting that acclaim, was recognized by the George Whittenborn Memorial Award and the International Tribal Art Book Prize. Alisa's Heroic Africans, Legendary Leaders, Iconic Sculptures received the International Tribal Art Book Prize as well in 2012. And going back to 2007, the Association of Art Museum Curators recognized the exhibition Eternal Ancestors and its accompanying catalog as among the profession's outstanding exhibition catalogs. Dr. LaGamma is a graduate of UVA, the University of Virginia, and earned her MA and PhD in art history from Columbia University. Alisa's 1995 dissertation titled The Art of the Punu Makuj Masquerade, Portrait of an Equatorial Society, was based on a year of field work in southern Gabon. And again, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here today.
I'm so honored to be a filament in the splendid tapestry that Dennis Geronimus has woven with all of us present. And I'm immensely appreciative of Director Michael Kwackelstein's support of this initiative and all the effort that the wonderful NIKI team has put into such a successful convening. So thank you all. Goldsmith, sculptor, and author Benvenuto Cellini famously opens his autobiography of 1558 with a revelatory anecdote about a competition between himself and the goldsmith Lucagnolo to produce a work of art. Given complete freedom in that exercise, Lucagnolo elected to make a large gold vase, whereas Cellini produced a small but intricate piece of jewelry. In the birth of artist authors and the Negozio del Inestimabile, Corinne Lucas Fiorato notes that Cellini establishes a contrast between an artisan whose products monetary value can simply be appraised according to the precious matter from which it is composed, and his own investment in a process with spiritual and intellectual dimensions that yielded a creation of inestimable worth. Art historians have underscored the important role of the writings of Vasari and Cellini as practitioners in elevating their status as authors of works of intellectual merit that exceeds mere craftsmanship. The African artifacts from this same moment that I will be addressing make manifest evidence of conceptual thought and imagination underlying their masterful execution. In the absence of comparable first-hand commentary by their African authors and any background on the biographies of those individuals, they have, however, remained isolated from discussions of their Western contemporaries. A pioneering yet unfamiliar product of Africa and Europe's earliest cross-cultural interaction are this pair of horns carved in present-day Sierra Leone, acquired by the Grand Dukes of Tuscany here in Florence. Ownership of such instruments sounded to call for the hunt or battle was the purview of European royalty. The exterior surfaces of these examples are entirely filled with dense relief carving arranged in a series of horizontal bands of varying widths. The narrow tip culminates in a mouthpiece rendered in the clenched jaws of a fantastical creature. The intricacy of their imagery that combines hunting scenes with passages of pure decoration were the subject of rollout drawings produced in 1643 as engravings that illustrate the Danish natural historian and antiquarian Ole Worm's catalogue of his Museum Wormanium. Both works that I just showed were subsequently registered in a manuscript inventory of 1769. Today, one is in the Musée National des Thermes in the Cluny in Paris, and the other one that I showed is in the Hermitage. Actually, I'm going to go back again. Until only recently, such virtuosic fruits of the skill and imagination of West and Central African artists have been miscast items among the works conserved in venerated Western art centers from Florence to Rome, Turin, Vienna, and Paris. Their aesthetic beauty and skilled execution alone would elicit admiration by any measure. What renders them utterly unique and inestimably precious, however, is the fact that they constitute tangible physical evidence of a leap of imagination that ushered in sustained direct engagement between sub-Saharan Africa and Europe. Shaped from the prized, durable medium of ivory, the works in question survive as exceedingly rare primary sources designed by Africans at a turning point in history. They reflect an instant in time prior to the escalation of the Atlantic slave trade. These elements of a consequential history are not simply local visual impressions of a nascent relationship by members of a society that has not left written records. They are the concrete manifestation of the earliest interactions between Europeans and African artists whose talent, observed firsthand, was admired and respected. Their makers departed from the familiar to respond to novel creative direction. That attempt to reach beyond the respective worlds of established local tradition and outside patronage sparked something utterly new. It yielded innovative works conceived as bridges across cultures and sources of mutual enrichment that were all too soon forgotten and relegated to obscurity. So buried has been the history of the surviving creative output of African artists during the Renaissance that they have required a 20th century rediscovery. British museum keeper William Fagg began to redress this historical amnesia in 1959. He began doing so by establishing the parameters of a chapter in the history of art devoted to the luxury works produced during the earliest period of contact between Africa and Europe. Fagg defined what have since come to be known as the Afro-Portuguese ivories as works commissioned in present-day Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and Angola by Portuguese visitors to coastal Africa from local artists between the late 15th and late 16th centuries. In each of these centers, ivory was abundantly available and skillfully exploited by established professional carvers. Considering the rarity and prestige accorded ivory in Europe, given the opportunity to acquire it directly at the source, Portuguese traders sponsored exemplars of its refinement for export and customized adaptations of forms favored back home. This resulted in exquisitely carved hybrid creations that include covered vessels in the form of salt cellars and pyxes, spoons, forks, handles for daggers, and olifants or horns. So seamless is the blending of local and appropriated genres and motifs in the composition of these unique artifacts that it is difficult to determine where their African sources end and the European ones begin. The effort to untangle those commingled influences and deepen understanding of that confluence of cultural traditions became the focus of art historian Kathy Curno's 1983 doctoral thesis at Indiana University, entitled The Afro-Portuguese Ivories, Classification and Stylistic Analysis of a Hybrid Art Form, which is a foundational source to this day. Using designs that had currency in elite European households as point of departure, the works composed from such prestigious matter that survive were never put to utilitarian use. Instead, they entered celebrated fine arts holdings, such as those of the Medici, as exotic marvels. An indication of their aesthetic appeal is that none other than the great Albrecht Dürer acquired 2 such salt cellars for 3 florins in Antwerp in December of 1520 that are among the earliest examples recorded outside Portugal. But nobody knows whatever happened to those. We haven't been able to trace them. For a quarter of a century, Italian art historian Ezio Bassani scoured early European collections to fully flesh out the extent of the Afro-Portuguese corpus. His first publication on the subject, in Critica d'Arte, is devoted to antichi lavori africani nelle collezioni medicee, 1975. In 1988, Bassani partnered with William Fagg to co-curate the Center for African Art in New York's landmark exhibition, Africa and the Renaissance, Art in Ivory, and author its catalog that remains a major publication on this subject. Bassani further attempted to comprehensively survey artifacts from sub-Saharan Africa recorded in archival documents that arrived in the West before the 19th century. In doing so, he assembled a catalogue raisonné of those still in existence that include Afro-Portuguese ivories not currently traceable in archival records. In 2000, he joined forces with Malcolm MacLeod, director of the Hunterian Museum, to publish African art and artifacts in European collections, 1400 to 1800. The summary of their findings is illuminating. Of fewer than 1,000 items listed in historical inventories and records, 818 to be precise, Bassani was able to identify only 534 extant artifacts. Dispersed across many different institutions, the reservoir of the material culture dating from the earliest period of transatlantic trade that endures is minute. Ivories figure especially prominently, given that unlike gold, that was similarly highly valued, but generally melted down, ivory artifacts could not be reworked into a different form. And obviously, it is very much my hope that the work of Kate Lowe and others will expand this corpus as work in the archive continues. In an exhibition project I organized for the Metropolitan in 2015 on Congo civilization, I sought to bring together as much of the creative output from Central Africa associated with the Kingdom of Congo. On that occasion, we succeeded in assembling most of the fragile luxury textiles and ivories that endure from the earliest period of exchanges between Congo sovereigns and their European counterparts. Evidence of mastery of complex, abstract design across media. A revelation of that project was the scarcity of such physical vestiges of that historical moment. And basically everything from that period was in one small room. With that in mind, Bassani notes that more than half of 446 of the items he was able to locate in early collections originated in West Africa. Of those, 79 can be traced to the Kingdom of Benin and 165 to Sierra Leone. Given the continuity of Benin as a living tradition, the richness of its oral traditions, and a greater backdrop of relevant European written sources, the legacies of that great city-state, along with that of Congo, are both better chronicled than coastal Sierra Leone. Instead, a relative dearth of social history accompanies the approximately 100 15th to 16th century ivories, including the two Medici horns that I showed in the beginning. And for that reason, these physical artifacts carry even greater weight as material evidence of the achievements of their makers at a watershed moment in the history of art. In 1462, Portuguese navigator Pedro de Sintra was the first European to map one of the world's largest natural harbors, surrounded by what came to be referred to as the Serra Leão, or Lion Mountains. Sierra Leone River estuary, situated near what became the coastal port of Freetown, afforded an ideal source for the procurement of fresh water and provisions. The Portuguese referred to the ancestors of the Bullum and Temne, with whom they established contact there and commercial relations along the coast, as Sapi. Both Bullum and Temne communities took the form of semi-autonomous towns, governed by a leader and council of elders, who in turn were under the ceremonial and ritual aegis of the paramount regional ruler. Prior to European contact, they had long been involved in regional trade networks that extended as far as the Gambia, in which coastal salt, dried fish, pepper, cola, and indigo were exchanged for gold, iron, and cloth produced in the interior, without fundamentally disrupting Bolam and Temne society. The Portuguese afforded a mutually satisfying expansion of their economic activities in exchange for imported tin, beads, brass, and cloth. The locals provided gold, captives, and ivory tusks. Mined at Bambouk between the upper Senegal and Falemne rivers, the gold procured that was brought down the coast often took the form of jewelry. It was in a different format than for the trans-Saharan trade. The ivory was harvested from Sierra Leone's once considerable elephant population hunted with poison spears. During this initial stage of the transatlantic slave trade, historian Philip Curtin estimates that Sierra Leone accounted for less than 3% of the numbers of enslaved individuals. The sailor Alvaro Velho provided information drawing upon 8 years of residency along the Guinea coast to Valentin Fernandez, a scholar residing in Portugal. And Fernandez, in his 1507 description of Guinea, speaks to the caliber of local artists and their openness to new directions. And I quote, "The men of the country are Black and very talented in making ivory artifacts such as salt cellars and spoons. Whatever sort of objects is designed for them, they can carve it in ivory." Sierra Leone was also noted for its locally woven mats and textiles that continued to be exported into the 18th century. The English physician Thomas Winterbottom refers to these as, quote, "woven into a great variety of patterns and stained with very beautiful and indelible colors." No examples, however, of these more perishable fiber arts are known to have been preserved. In the absence of any detail concerning the development of Bolam and Temne visual traditions, art historians have underscored mastery of carving indubitably developed over many prior generations. A broader tradition of sculptural patronage that predates the European presence takes the form of representations in stone that for the most part remained in situ until recently. Thousands of these soapstone sculptures have been unearthed in the farm soil of southeastern Sierra Leone, now inhabited by Bolam, Temne, and Kisi peoples. Based on formal parallels of a figural style in which the head is defined with globular protruding eyes and nose with dilated nostrils, it has been proposed that the same sculptors worked in both this medium as well as ivory. While nothing is known of the intended role these human and animal depictions in stone played in the lives of their patrons, art historian Frederick Lamp has addressed their redeployment and incorporation in an array of more recent unrelated ritual practices over the course of the last century. Kathy Curnow notes that over the course of the year 1504, 131 ivory salt cellars and spoons were carved for Portuguese travelers and arrived in Lisbon. That number is greater than the total of all those extant from 1490 until 1550. Soon after, political upheaval appears to have brought that sappy patronage to a sudden end. During the 1540s, incursions by a Mande-speaking group sought to seize the trade networks controlled by Bullam and Temne leaders. That, what many historians refer to as the Mane conquest, resulted in an exodus of their people who were sold into slavery to the Portuguese. Jesuit missionary Manuel Alvarez wrote in the 17th century of the dissolution of cultural practices that ensued. And I quote, "It is the fault of these foreign kings that the country is so poor, because they have captured so many master craftsmen and have committed so many vexations on the indigenous people, that these have become less and less concerned and have given up the exercise of their arts." No ivory artifacts dating to before this period are known to have survived in Sierra Leone. The corpus of approximately 100 sappy Portuguese ivories in Bassani and Fagg's 1988 tally is comprised of 56 salt cellars, 3 pyxes, 8 spoons, 3 forks, 2 daggers, and 33 olifants. Based purely on visual analysis of these, Kurnow, Fagg, and Bassani all concur that, considering the consistency of their forms and styles, they were likely the output of a handful of workshops over the course of that limited period of time. Among the attributions proposed by Bassani is that the 2 Medici hunting horns that I showed in the beginning, as well as one other example, share the same author, given the distinctive treatment of the animal head mouthpiece. And they suggest, and this is, purely visual analysis, in their assessment, that a common decorative motif in the form of a small quatrefoil carved in the interstices of the ribbon-like decoration, that, so you see that little quatrefoil in the interstices, they see that as the signature of a particular workshop. Although American museums came into existence half a millennia after the collections assembled by Renaissance princes, 4 of the creations of these early Bullam or Temne sculptors, published by Fagg and Bassani, have entered the Met's collection as gifts by as many different donors. Presented as a grouping positioned at a new threshold, with galleries devoted to European sculpture and decorative arts of the Renaissance, they will provide future visitors to the museum a sense of the scope of forms created by an array of workshops in this region. Bullam and Temne carvers produced ivory horns for both local and European elites. Those designed for export to Europe, such as the Medici examples cited earlier, differ from those intended for local use, for their incorporation of suspension lugs and in the way they produced sound. The mouthpiece for the European models is at the tip of the tusk, while their African corollaries are transverse trumpets, in which the mouthpiece is set into the concave part of the tusk. An early example now at the Met is one of a small number likely produced as part of a local chief's regalia, ornamented in a style that reflects awareness of oliphants commissioned for export. At the summit of the instrument's narrow terminus is a figure seated on two spheres. Hands held to its face, a crocodile climbs its back. And crocodiles are a frequently depicted local subject, emblematic of power, strength, and authority. According to 20th century Temne beliefs, individuals possessing mystical powers may manifest themselves in this form. The horn's pronounced lozenge aperture is situated centrally, while within the concave curve, while its base is adorned with a pair of reptiles rendered in relief. As seen earlier with the Medici horns, Bolam or Temne oliphants generally feature mouthpieces articulated as the open maws of a fierce, monstrous creature. A work recently transferred to the Met is one of 7 nearly identical horns with fluted bodies that terminate in the head of a fantastical scaly predator. The feature of a pronounced lozenge concave mouthpiece suggests they could have been intended for use in Africa, although some incorporate a suspension lug. Based on both the form of the mouthpiece and crocodile-like finial, Fagg and Bassani attributed them to Sierra Leone. While the reptilian imagery is of local origin, fantastical creatures like dragons portrayed in 15th and 16th century illustrations of St. George may also inform such representations. Curnow has noted that the value accorded ivory horns was so great that Portuguese visitors acquired not only those made to their specifications, but ones like this one and the last one that may have been intended for the local marketplace. Unlike the Met example that has thus far only been traced back to the mid-20th century, the provenance of the others in this style, many of them can be traced back to the 16th century. Notable among these is a nearly identical one now in the Vienna Museum for Volkskunde that was transferred into the Natural History Museum in 1898 from the Ambras Castle collection in Innsbruck. Often referred to as Europe's earliest museum, Ambras Castle's holdings were assembled during the second half of the 16th century by Holy Roman Emperor and Archduke of Tyrol, Ferdinand II of Habsburg. The sappy elephant would have been among the works displayed to delight the viewer with other precious ivories in one of 18 cabinets organized according to material. It figures in the 1598 inventory of this most prestigious Kunst- and Wunderkammer of the late Renaissance. A fragment of another of these fluted oliphants, now in Oxford's Ashmolean Museum, was likely acquired by the English naturalist and collector John Tredescant by 1638. Like the Met example, it incorporates a suspension lug. In a letter dated to 1625, Tredescant writes, "The merchants of the Guinea Company and Gold Coast of his desire to obtain instruments of the long ivory flutes." The work's 1685 catalog entry describing it as an Indian ivory carved trumpet reflects the fact that from the 17th century on, refined African ivories were frequently misattributed to Asia. Finally, 2 other examples believed to have arrived in Europe between 1551 and 1600 are now both in the Department of Ethnography of the National Museum of Denmark in Copenhagen. One was first inventoried as part of the Royal Kunstkammer in 1737. The second appears in a 1710 inventory of the Kunstkammer of Gottorp Castle in Schleswig-Holstein, and was incorporated into the Royal Kunstkammer following Denmark's 1751 Northern War victory over its neighbor. Despite the fact that spoons are frequently mentioned in early customs inventories, accompanied by modest values due to their extreme fragility, few of these highly refined miniature creations have survived. The example now in the Met's collection, with an armless figure as its stem, is so fine that its bowl is practically translucent. Its preservation is even more miraculous when we realize that it is one of only 8 of these Sierra Leonean spoons identified to date. Of the genres carved from ivory by Bullum and Temne sculptors, the purely ornamental vessels classified as salt cellars are the most imaginative, original, and technically demanding to execute. Constituting nearly half of the Sierra Leone corpus, Fag and Bassani have proposed they are the creations of 3 to 4 workshops. Their multi-tiered structure is one in which the spherical container is extended by an elegantly ornate lid and an even more complex base. Art historian Susan Vogel has noted that the rounded form of the container, evident in most Afro-Portuguese salt cellars, may have been based on that of gourds, commonly used as receptacles in this region. The Met example is one of 7 works attributed to a single workshop. Its upper half is adorned with a series of rosettes and extended by an abstract open-work tower-like finial. Actually, I'm going to go on to show you the Met example on the right again. Around the conical base, male and female figures alternate with a series of crouching dogs, with ears flattened and fangs bared, confronting spitting serpents winding their way down and around from a cushion-like form above. The bare-chested figures wear wrappers and striped trousers. Such dramatic confrontations between animals, in this case dogs and serpents, is a ubiquitous but enigmatic subject that appears 14 times within the Sierra Leone corpus. Dogs were part of the imagery drawn upon from European prints for the heraldic scenes depicted on the olifants. Among the Bullum and Temne, they were a presence in domestic context and used as sacrificial offerings. The snake imagery had several local associations with mystical powers. The most common variety in Sierra Leone, the python sebe, is considered sacred. Among the Temne, the main spiritual force and symbol of transition is a serpent associated with water. The interstices between those elegant spiraling pythons are accented with beaded gadrooning that, like the floral motifs, are of European origin. While the sappy Portuguese ivories remain physically immutable primary sources, they have episodically been recategorized in response to shifting Western attitudes toward Africa. Despite their presence here in Florence, as the earliest artifacts exported from sub-Saharan Africa and held in Medicean collections, they're coming into being as the opening salvo of a dialogue between equals, remains an obscure interlude in the history of art. At the time of their creation, recognition of the precious matter and human ingenuity that shaped them merited enshrinement within elite repositories. Within a few generations following their arrival in Europe, however, their origins unrecorded, they were reduced to precious matter. In the wake of the radical decline Africa's prestige suffered on a global stage, such refined artifacts were increasingly incompatible with developing cultural and racial prejudices. Accordingly, by the end of the 16th century, they were reattributed to India and the Asian world. The rise of interest in natural sciences led to another demotion of the status of such non-Western material culture. From the 18th century, they were reclassified as natural history specimens relating to exotic cultures. At the dawn of a modern era, princely collections underwent rearrangement, and what were once considered aesthetic marvels were banished to newly established ethnographic institutions. Unlike the salt cellars by their European contemporaries, such as Benvenuto Cellini, inexorably adjectives of beautiful, ingenious, and wonderful ceased to be applied to the creative achievements of African artists. Ironically, Cellini's masterpiece, produced in parallel, reshapes African gold and ebony into what has become an icon of art history. For a mere 50 years, Bullam and Temne sculptors had experimented with an influx of outside sources. Mutually enriching cross-cultural exchanges yielded original products formed by highly disciplined professionals until that momentum suddenly came to a halt. The successive tragedies of war and enslaved exile brought the unfulfilled promise of this movement to an abrupt end. In the Fine Arts Museum arena of 2025, we seek to reintroduce what remain objects of wonder that instill awe for their beauty by crediting their Bullam and Temne authors with the creative adventurousness claimed by their European contemporaries.
So thank you so much for that both beautiful and heartbreaking account and for bringing the fraught histories of these mesmerizing objects to our consciousness. It's my great honor to next introduce our penultimate speaker. I think overnight we've now become friends, so I'll call you my friend Carmen Fracchia. She is Emerita Professor of Hispanic Art History at Birkbeck University of London. She also fulfilled numerous visiting appointments, including those at the University of Pittsburgh, Chicago, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and the University Rey Juan Carlos in Madrid. Carmen's pioneering research links visual regimes and modern Spanish discourses on slavery and human diversity with the historic roots of contemporary racism in the Hispanic world. Her monograph, Black But Human, Slavery and Visual Art in Habsburg Spain, 1480, 1700, and 2019, is the very first book to analyze slavery and depictions of Blackness in visual culture across imperial Spain. In addition to her public work, Carmen has also forged vital links outside of the university, consulting on numerous external projects, including films and television shows, with also ongoing collaborations with institutions ranging from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam to the Menil Collection in Texas. So it's my great honor to present Carmen to you, who will be speaking on Juan de Pareja and New Spain.
Right. Well, I would say thank you very much for inviting me, for giving me this opportunity, then, and also to Daphne and Lex. Not everything. I'm not going to do all the whole thing. I'm very grateful to be here. Right. So this is intriguing. Yeah? This picture here. Right. Okay. I have to clarify one thing for certain, that this is just a work in progress. Okay. It's not a definitive thing like a book or an article. But my paper today is a work in progress. This is going to be a presentation of fragments, because this research is all in the making. Okay, in my last book, I was concerned about the visibilization of the African diaspora in Spain and the ways in which depiction of the African diaspora created a visual archive of new iconographies. That was nothing definitive either, okay, for me. However, today, by choosing to discuss Juan de Pareja and the contacts that he may have or may not have in New Spain, right? And we'll be addressing the ways in which the African diaspora in early modern Spain creates new links with the viceroyalties of Spain, right? So I firmly believe that visual practices and the stigma of slavery was intrinsically immersed and uninterruptedly woven, with no clear delineation between Africa, Iberia, Europe, and the Hispanic world. The documentary evidence of Juan de Pareja's enslavement to Diego Velázquez, court painter to Philip IV of Spain, as well as his father's name, Juan de Pareja, and his natal city, Antequera, in the Diocese of Malaga, was provided only in 1983 with the discovery by Jennifer Montague of Pareja's document of manumission from slavery, signed by him and by his slave owner on the 23rd of November, 1650 in the city of Rome, during the Jubilee year. The Italian legal manumission was signed by the Spanish royal agent Juan de Córdoba Herrera at his house in the Parioni district, where both Spanish painters were staying before Velázquez rented an apartment with Pareja nearby. Okay? In May, they spent 2 long years in Italy between November 1649 and July 1651 to acquire paintings and sculpture for Philip IV. Almost all documents, including those signed by Pareja himself on behalf of Velázquez in 1649 and in 1650, adding the word Hispánico to his father's name in his signature as witness, were signed by Juan de Córdoba at his house. Okay? Here you can see, you know this painting. I'm sure you all do know, but this is the family, Pacheco's family. The Virgin is Juana Pacheco, married to Velázquez, okay? So almost, Velázquez certainly trusted the enslaved assistants and authorized Pareja to be a legal witness and sign documents involving his master and his family before and after the state in Italy. For example, a Velázquez lawsuit in 1642, the inheritance to Juana Pacheco, his master's wife, and the hiring of the domestic servant, a 12-year-old girl, Maria Sanchez Calderon. The authorization to administer the properties owned by the Velázquez family in Seville, and the authorization to Francisca Velázquez, his master's daughter, to make her will. It is interesting that the 3 days after Juan de Pareja manumission, in a letter of presentation of Velázquez from Rodrigo Díaz de Vivar, Duke of the Infantado and Spanish ambassador to the Cardinal Carlo de Medici in Florence on the 26th November 1650, a comment was made about the relationship they had between the Spanish painter and his servant, and he said, quote, Diego de Velázquez, and a servant to whom much esteem is shown, comes to Venice to do some things in his service. So, right. So that is Juana de Pareja. So this is Francesca Velázquez. During the trip to Italy, Velázquez also painted Pareja and exhibited this magnificent portrait in the papal city in the Pantheon on the 19th of March 1650. This is one of the most compelling portraits ever made of an African, Afro-Hispanic enslaved subject before his emancipation from slavery in the early modern Spain. World, I say. Now, no wonder that Pareja, in spite of representing himself on the right, in a symbolic and metaphorical way, and thus distancing himself from the naturalistic or realistic style of his master, he adopts the template of Velázquez's portrayal of him as a nobleman in 1661, as a character in the huge composition of the Colin of St. Matthew, which belonged to the royal court in Madrid. Okay, I'm not going to go into this painting all along, but if you obviously have questions, I will, because I've written so much about them that it must be, you know, the end there. Okay, so now it's interesting. It's very interesting that how he represents himself. And now you can see what happens here. Okay. This is an X-ray, obviously, of this painting by Velázquez, and you can see how he idealized his own, the portrait of his enslaved guy. And then he further whitened himself. Who is Demba here? Can I see Demba?
Here.
Demba. Thank you so much, Demba, because now we join. You gave me a great favor with your Giotto's executioner, right? Or dress up in white, because people couldn't believe me, right? This is what happens because he's not isolated. He's not depicting himself in isolation, you see. He's depicting himself here on the left margin, you see. He's holding a signature in his hand, 1661. He's a character in a religious scene. This is what it is. And it's a character that is not denying his roots by whitening himself. On the contrary, he knows that he's part of it as well, because he's a Christian. 1661 was after the expulsion of all the Muslims in Spain, which was 1609, 1640. Okay? So it's very important for him to be acknowledged and recognized as a different fellow. He's not a Muslim, because to be black was almost certain to be a Muslim, right? And almost certain he is differentiating himself. I'm putting himself opposite to St. Matthew, who will become the apostle of Ethiopia, right? The first African nation, if you see. Well, I can go on and on, but I've written so much that this is not the point for me in this novel, but I can go on. Okay, so let me just have a look. We still do not know the circumstances in which Pareja became Velázquez's enslaved painter, but Peter Cherry, an art historian, disclosed a revealing document signed on the 25th of February, 1634 in Madrid by Pareja and Velázquez together regarding the dowry of Velázquez's daughter Francisca Velázquez, in which Juan de Pareja, it says it was a resident at this court, in the Spanish court, that was 1634. Right. Besides, we have precious art historiographical material about Pareja. The inclusion of Pareja, Palomino's Spanish Parnassus is exceptional. The latter was the only art writer to record in 1715, 1724, one of Pareja's portraits. It says, quote, "Our Pareja had a most singular ability in painting portraits, of which I have seen some that are most excellent, such as the one of José Rates, the one you see here, architect of this court. The biographer, this is the first biographer of Pareja, claimed that Pareja's portraits were executed in the manner of the master, so that these portraits were sometimes thought to be by Velázquez, in which one recognized, quote, totally the manner of Velázquez that may believe to be his. I agree with Enriqueta Harris when she thinks Pareja might have helped Velázquez to complete his portraits and copies from the pontiff to cardinals. Okay. In 1957, Pareja's second biographer, Juan Antonio Gallanino, identified most of the artist's portraits and religious compositions, which amount to 30, although the whereabouts of 20 of the paintings were unknown. In 2002, 2023 in the catalog to the first exhibition ever dedicated to Juan de Pareja at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the painter's visual archive has been revised and new possible attributions were made to Pareja of 4 Spanish royal portraits, between of them Philip IV. 1 portrait of his master and 3 portrayals of noblemen. Contrary to his master, Pareja dedicated his work mainly to religious subjects, which he tended to sign and sometimes also to date. In the year 1800, Juan Agustín Sean Bermúdez, in his dictionary of Spanish painter, was the only art historiographical source to mention Pareja's monumental painting of the coin of San Matthew on the top, right? And the baptism of Christ in 1667. He also did, at this time, based on the 18th century Spanish traveler Antonio Pons, who published Viaje de España, Traveling in Spain, recorded Pareja's 4 religious paintings now destroyed, which he saw in the Agustinian monastery of Los Recoletos in Madrid in 1776. And I'm going to quote. Okay, sorry. No, sorry. Unbelievable. Okay. He says, San John of Pareja, he saw this painting. He said, I saw this painting by Pareja, San John the Evangelist, San John the Baptist, Saint Laurentius, and the Lady of Guadalupe of Mexico. Okay? This no longer extant decoration was adjacent to the chapel of Our Lady of Copacabana, one of the most important devotions in the Americas, which had her origins in the Viceroyalty of Peru, in a territory currently belonging to Bolivia. However, no much attention has been given to this work by Pareja, and Pons has also been largely ignored. Even if the decoration and paintings did not survive, the hypothetical link established between Pareja and the Viceroyalty of Spain, which shouldn't come as a surprise, have been nagging at me for ages. Okay? It's just dreaming. Therefore, after consulting some experts on this specific iconography, like Maria Elena Alcalá and Concha Garcia Saiz, ex-director of the Museum of America in Madrid, I decided to reconstruct Pareja's network of patrons, of clients, and fellow artists, with the firm belief that this methodology will enable us to explore and hopefully to reveal Pareja's network of contacts with the Viceroyalty of New Spain during the Habsburg dynasty. I also believe this reconstruction of Pareja's network would bring to the fore the key contacts of clients of fellow artists who might have added Pareja's visualization of the impact that the transatlantic slave trade had, right, in the casta system. The casta system that base extended in Mexico until the 19th century, when the system was officially abolished, not following the independence of New Spain from Spain and becoming Mexico, right? Now, why on earth I'm talking about castas? Because the principle of casta paintings was exactly the same principle by which Pareja depicted himself as a white man, okay? The principle of the purity of blood. Okay? Purity of face equal purity of blood. That was the thing. So, and also the fact of it looks completely crazy what I'm saying. I'm totally aware of that, but this is going to be the case. Right? No. Believe me. You see here, right? You see, this is Sumarra, right? This is the first Archbishop of Mexico who created, opened up the Cathedral of Mexico. And this is in the casta system. This is on top by Luis Femena. But Antonio Lorenzana, Archbishop of New Spain, in 1777, in all Spain, there is only single caste. Men is recognized, and in the New Spain, many and different. That was a sentence that really made me so furious. I cannot believe it. Made me furious because it's not true. That the ignorance of the fact of completely forgotten about the Muslim and Jewish and other and Black people in Spain. Anyway, here you have all the first ever set of casta paintings in produced and made by what's it called? Juan Rodriguez Juarez, right, in 1750s, and it's the Bremer House in Wiltshire in UK. Okay, so it's classified practically on three systems. Okay, right. It says the first one that should be the first one. You have three paintings. Usually, it's a set of 14 or 16 paintings. This is the classification. Is the white people can become Spanish even if they are mixed with the indigenous population. In the third or fourth generation, they will become Spanish, and the black never ever will become Spanish. Okay, so black would be completely customized. You know? It will become casta, and will disappear. But that was the system. That was imposed by the Spaniards there. Now that was it. The two most important things. Okay. Casta paintings are a pictorial genre which depicts the variety of interracial mixing resulting from the widespread union between Spanish colonizers, enslaved of African descent, and indigenous populations. Casta painting is a series of representation of mixed unions and the children of those unions, whose name, quote, and taxonomies were recorded in the Book of Castas in New Spain or colonial Mexico. Says the premise of this genealogy was that a person's blood lineage could be traced and his or her identity labeled. Now the exciting thing is that a new set of Castas paintings have survived and discovered just recently in the UK in Leicester. Okay, this is the whole thing, as I said before, 1725, what you said before. Okay, these are the absurd names that each casta has. So this is the principle of the casta system that's in the Bremer and Wiltshire. Okay, Spaniards and Indian produce a mestizo, and Spaniards and black produce a mulatto, and it's a complete different line. Now, in Leicester, we have this exhibition, okay, recently, which were in storage in the 5 casta paintings which were in the storage in the Leicester Museum and Art Gallery have been cleaned and conserved, explored and investigated since the discovery by Tara Munro in 2000. I don't remember exactly, 2017, I think, but in 2020, Ilona Katsu recognized this series as an original set of casta paintings dated from the early 1700s. She confirmed the attribution to Juan Rodriguez Juarez of his circle, an important artist responsible for the invention of new subjects in the early 18th century Mexico. One of the new 3 sets ascribed to this Mexican painter and perhaps the finest. Okay, right. Obviously, it is almost impossible to have an hypothesis about Pareja's link with the New Spain if we don't have any idea of the visual model for Our Lady of Guadalupe in Madrid that he followed. So the questions were, did he create something new or did he follow a Mexican model? This is one of the questions, okay? There are many others. Okay, in order to further explore this problem, I decided to explore Pareja's relationship with the citas in his portraits. Okay, this is my methodology now. Well, this is the casta paintings that we're going to see now, the one that has been discovered. Okay, with the same system, but you can see that portraits, really beautiful portraits, beautiful really, even if it's so racist. Que son justísimos. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay. Okay, this is a part of the series. Barbarian Indians were the Indians who were not baptized. Then when they were baptized, they have proper names. Now, this is one of the portraits that Pareja did. Sorry about the writing there. Okay, so Agustín Moreto y Cabañas. Okay, I decided to look at each single of Parejas, which is at the Museo Lázaro Galdiano in Madrid. Moreto was a playwright, poet, priest, and lawyer. He studied at the University of Alcalá de Henares, and according to María Luisa Lobato, an expert play of Spanish 17th century playwrights. And according to her, Moreto and Pareja probably met at the Spanish court, since the latter were there during the years that both Pareja and Velázquez were at the court. Moreto's last play was about the Peruvian Saint Rose of Lima, canonized in 1671. We know that she became the first Tridentine saint of the New World and patron of South America and the Philippines. Moreto was known at the Madrid court for many, many plays involving Black characters, okay? Like the La Negra por el Honor, or Black for Honor, 1668. I can talk to you about this as well. Okay, so the ex-director of the Museum of America, Concha Garcia Sainz, and I immediately identify here between Pareja and the New World in the 8th Duke of Albuquerque here. Yeah. Oh, nice portrait, isn't it? Yes, nice. Just to wake you up, just to wake you up. Remember. This guy, believe it or not, this guy. He was the vice governor, he was the vice governor in Spain, Francisco Fernández de las Cuevas. Okay, I shouldn't read. The 8th Duke of Albuquerque, who was, a promoter of the Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, right? And look at who was the author of this. Was the man, the author, the very author of the authentic, the first Lady of Guadalupe that you see here, with the 4 apparitions, were the grandfather of the guy who invented or introduced the Casa paintings in the world. Okay? Are you there? Okay, a promoter of Our Lady of Guadalupe and a protector of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Francisco Fernández de Córdoba, Duke of Albuquerque, led New Spain from Madrid in September 1660. He served as an ambassador extraordinary to Vienna to accompany Margaret Teresa of Spain, daughter of King Philip IV of Spain, when she married her uncle Leopoldo I, Holy Roman Empire. In 1668, Fernández de la Cueva was named Viceroy of Sicily, where he remained 2 years. In 74, he was appointed chief of the household for Philip IV and died in 1676. Well, now, which is the model that he must follow? The thing is that this director that is Concha Garcia Sainz, oh my God, this is something I'm not very sure. The Viceroy no. The other thing that are important, the most important thing perhaps about this Duke of Viceroy is that he was actually the protector of a specific monastery where this painting arrived in 1662. Okay, this is what the thing is. The Viceroy Duke of Albuquerque was a patron and benefactor of the monastery of the Immaculate Conception of Agreda, founded in 1619 by the parents of the famous Sor Maria de, I don't know if you ever heard, Sor Maria de Jesús de Agreda. Okay, and what happens here is, because Pareja and Velázquez were together in Rome, but we thought that he probably found this painting or copied this painting or saw a painting of this copy there, because when the first copy of this Virgin of Guadalupe arrived by the Adamix race guide in Spain, it's called the painter Juan de Correa, it was too late for Pareja. Juan de Correa arrived there in 1659, and Velázquez and Pareja left in 1651. They couldn't have seen that. So it's probably that what he saw is this composition here. Okay, the origin of this canvas, signed by José Juárez in 1656, right, was a donation to this monastery by the lady in waiting of the Duchess of Albuquerque, okay? The wife of this guy that I show you. I don't know the wife of this. I haven't got his wife. whom she served from Spain from 1653 to 1662. Okay, the copy arrived in 1662 with this lady in waiting decided to become a nun and enter this convent. Okay, and Pareja must have seen him, must have seen this painting there. If that is the case, that we don't know, but if that is the case, he actually, sorry, this is actually would have been the first Virgin of Guadalupe signed by Spanish, the first copy of the Virgin of Guadalupe signed by Spanish painter. Okay. Okay. The other portraits I will do very quickly because it's fragments. You can tell me when the time is over. And says, according to Palomino again, the first biographer of Pareja, in 1652, Philip IV decided nominating Velázquez as his chief chamberlain of his imperial palace, the most prestigious royal appointment for which he became a supervisor of two key royal projects, where Pareja also took part. One is the chapel of San Isidro in the Church of St. Andrew, heavily funded by the celebrities of Spain, such as the Duchess of Albuquerque, and the Salón de Espejos in the Alcázar of Madrid. Okay. So at this point is more fragmented even my stuff. He decided to paint this portrait, and we didn't know in the Hermitage until the exhibition was taking part in 2023. We didn't know the identity of this guy. We know now who he is. He is one of Pareja's painters that collaborated with him in San Isidro together with Alonso Cano and with Carmen, right? Now we know that, and it was signed by Pareja as well, 1661. The abbot of the Benedictine in and he, sorry, this is the one, okay? By the time I knew this guy, by the time I knew the identity of this guy, well, I already done some studies about the Virgin of Montserrat. You see, the obsession about the Black Virgins was coming. And also all the people who work with Pareja are connected somehow with depicting the Virgin of Montserrat, okay? And I can give you all these details for that. And this is the saloon where the Velázquez was in charge. And you can see this is another whole paint. Sorry about this. You can see the lion behind the made of bronze. That is one of the things that Pareja and Velázquez brought from Rome, okay, to Philip IV. And it doesn't exist anymore because of the fire in 1734. Just to give you an idea. But in this concoction of these two major architectonic places is where they met other people. And then I found out for the first time that Pareja was paid the payments for Pareja, because I was obsessed saying, what is Pareja doing? Was he treated as any other white, so-called white minor or big artist? I don't know. Why did he have the same rights or no? Did he have his own workshop or not? I mean, his second biographer said that Pareja had his own workshop, but he didn't give us any evidence of that. So this is what I'm trying to reconstruct in this thing. And obviously he did have people who work for him, but we don't know who they are until we know better. Okay. Now, the other portrait, this is a San Isidro, this is all the people who work with Pareja, okay? And Ratés is the architect, right? Remember Ratés here? Well, Ratés actually was married to the widow of Churriguera, the names are very difficult to call, another architect, right? And by actually investigating this guy, Ratés and Churriguera and the people in San Isidro, I found out that Pareja not only was paid by work that he did, but he didn't do paintings. He actually employed as a gilda of sculptural work. So that means he actually owned, that was a proof for me enough that he owns his own workshop. Because there is a whole thing about writing the workshops that you have seen probably in the catalog by Luis Mendes in Seville. I'm not going to repeat all of that, but in the workshop, people could not have his own workshop, artistic workshop, if he didn't pass a certain exam, and the exam that was forbidden to slaves, right? But Pareja, for some reason, he succeeded because he couldn't have worked as a member of this team. He couldn't have been a sculptor. He couldn't have done any of these things if he didn't pass all this examination in the workshop. Right? That's another thing. Okay. I'm trying to do this on. Okay, my approach towards the Cita Rates led me to the discovery of Pareja's first records of payment for his previously unknown work on polychrome sculptures, which was part of his training as a painter. Until recently, I assumed that Jose Rates was a client or a patron, but no, he was a mate, a fellow artist who worked with Pareja as an institute and paid by the viceroyalties of the Spanish territories. He was paid back by the Duchess of Albuquerque. Okay? And Alonso Cano also was trained in Pacheco workshop. The autopista was done, this and it's still destroyed and hasn't been conserved. It was done by Alonso de Cano, another painter, who we have documents about Pareja and Velázquez and Alonso Cano, that signing documents like this. In Madrid on the 26th of September 1638, with the masters as witness to an concession for Cano to buy a property in Seville. Okay? They were all met together, and slowly I'm unfolding a lot of documents that excitingly are telling and reconstructing the life of Pareja as a proper artist in Madrid. Okay? I'm doing it alone. Okay. I'm writing, you know. Okay. The intersection, I'm going to finish in a minute. The intersection of Iberian visual cultures with transatlantic studies and studies of slavery, race, and religion is an ongoing and unfinished project. We cannot, therefore, dissociate this historical fact and carry on repeating the marginalization of others who perhaps never felt marginalized, as I seriously suspect it was the case of Juan de Pareja. However, it is also true that, as I previously claimed, the history of Black diasporic artists in Spain, and in that sense, we cannot, sorry about this. Okay, that's it, I want to finish because this is too much.